This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. In this podcast, I talk to women entrepreneurs at every stage of their journey about the challenges, the highs, the lows, and what they've learned along the way. We'll also hear from experts who share valuable tips on how to succeed the smart way. Let's jump in. How do you make it in a new country when you don't know the first thing about surviving, let alone thriving, when your peers are already miles ahead of you? How do you reverse engineer problems so you can break through brick walls to accomplish what you want? And how do you do all this in a completely homogenous, male-dominated field? In today's episode, entrepreneur and B2B venture capitalist Shruti Van Dyke Gandhi talks about finding your place in a tough ecosystem, succeeding as an invisible minority, staying motivated and laser-focused regardless of setbacks, the secrets to founding a venture backable firm, and much more. And now, here's Shruti. Hi, Shruti. Welcome to our podcast. We're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So tell us about Array. You're a rare breed of a venture capitalist. So tell us what Array does and how you got into it.
Well, Array Ventures invests in enterprise pre-seed stage companies. We're the first check usually as early as the company is just being formed. And we like leading those rounds. We can follow if necessary, but our average check size is $1.5 million to $2 million. And then we like to help our companies get from what we call the 0, 1, 10 stage. So when they're starting just formation to $1 million ARR to setting them up for 10 million ARR. As I said, it's an enterprise fund focused on infrastructure, cloud, security, data, all the good back-end things. And sometimes we also do application layer if we have a strong conviction around those front-end application focus areas as well. So anything B2B is fair game, I would say.
So looking at your background, rewinding a bit, I know you came from India and I read a story about how you had a really interesting start. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey and what got you into tech?
I came here with nothing. I'd worked really hard in India to get good grades, like all our parents push us, right? And then I came here and literally had not figured out how to get into college because I was an immigrant. And I came here right after my high school in India, after 12th grade. And so when I got here, we didn't know like the process of actually getting into college, which required a year of SAT scores and all the good stuff. So I had done no prep, didn't understand which college application should look like, nothing. And then kind of had to figure out my way. So I had never even thought about what I was going to study. I had no idea what to pick at that time. But then I was like, my dad's in the architect kind of construction world. I want to be an architect. I wanted to be a fashion designer, like every person who wants, at that age. And then quickly realized with a lot of my family telling me that, you can't make money right now. and you have to make money to kind of make sure you're able to support your family, which is kind of my brother was going to come to the US a few years later and all that good stuff. So yeah, I was like, okay, what makes money at this time? All right, computers. Let's study that. In the meantime, I taught myself how to code and also started working at this computing lab at a school in my neighborhood. Yeah, and so then I convinced that school to accept me without SAT scores. And I graduated in 3 years. And in the meantime, I also started working at IBM, which was in the same town in Poughkeepsie, New York. So I started doing all of that at the same time. I had a job before I graduated and I graduated in 3 years. So it was one of those things where kind of like just once there was a mission in place, which is I have to make money, I just kind of oriented myself around it. I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty good at like just figuring out a task. And I think most people are. I think once you're guided to make like a end goal happen, which was you need X amount of money and this is the best way to make money right now. I'm not sure if that's the best way or not. I could have started a company. I could have done so many other things. But I also didn't have any money, right? Like, so I would say like, that's how I got it started in the tech world, as your question is. I would say like, I continued, I worked there 10 years just because I just like, then realized I didn't love what I was doing. I was doing backend programming and assembly and basic. And I kind of was like, I don't like it. I'm going to move on from here to just maybe going on the application layer. I don't know what that really means, but I'm going to keep doing that. So I ended up working in like different business departments at IBM. And then I kind of like rose up the ranks, figuring out one step at a time, basically. And I worked in the chairman's office at one point. The chairman at the time was Sam Palmisano. Yeah. And just to continue to bring me where I am today, I was there. That's when I learned about venture capital. I had no idea what that was before. I was just telling someone I had to Google what really it meant. And so as I was figuring that out, I was like, oh, this is a fascinating industry. I want to start a company because I come from an entrepreneurial family. I knew that. I just needed some money. Venture business, I learned, okay, maybe you don't need that much money to start something. So let's figure it out. I started a company, but still didn't really actually know what venture capital was. Didn't really know how to raise money. I was not in the Bay Area. I was over 10 years ago in Chicago and New York. And so I didn't really have connections. I just had a corporate job and I'd never really been exposed to much. So kind of figured out, okay, I should learn venture capital without knowing how hard or easy it was. And then honestly got into venture capital and been in VC 10 years now. The reason I got into venture capital was I couldn't figure out how to raise money. So that's when I got into VC to learn how to raise money and learn the venture business and how VC scale businesses work. And then once I got into VC, I was like, all right, I think I have enough experience, like 4 or 5 years. Let's go start a fund. Well, let's go start a company. It ended up becoming a fund. And now 6 years in, I have a fund. So I cut out a lot of big pieces, but just to lay down the land here.
That is an excellent introduction. So you talked a little bit about not having the money and going down the VC route versus the founder route. Were there other factors that drove that decision for you to become a venture capitalist versus becoming a founder?
I was a founder, couldn't raise money. So that's when I decided I wanted to learn the venture business. And I was like, I'm technical, my co-founder's technical. We're building and working on a decent problem. What's the problem here? Anyway, so many problems around at the time that I've learned over the years. But the goal was to reverse engineer venture. Once I figured that out, then my goal was to be cool enough to go raise money in like a few weeks and close it, the round and stuff. So that was the goal. And the goal was if I master venture, I will understand the lay of the land. I will understand what makes it a venture-backed business versus just a bootstrap, slow growth kind of capital efficient businesses. So that was the goal. And that's how I got into venture.
So venture is notoriously hard to raise money, especially if you're a first-time venture capitalist, and the stats for venture funds themselves aren't supremely encouraging. What was the secret to cracking the code? How did you get a venture and how did you start raising funds for your venture capital?
That's true. Honestly, I got lucky. I didn't know about all the hard things. And then once I figured out I wanted this as a goal, I just kind of made it a goal. Recently, someone described me as like someone who can run through a brick wall. I'd never thought of me that way, but I am that way. I think once there's a challenge in front of me, it's reasonable enough. I'm not going to be like the best Olympic runner. I know my strengths and weaknesses, but in terms of like the knowledge economy, so not physical limits and stuff. I know, I want to sometimes accomplish. I also am very much structured in terms of like figuring out what my strengths and weaknesses are. So I decided venture was something I wanted to do, just to learn. And once I started looking for a job, I realized how hard it was to actually to do it. But I got lucky. I said, what are my strengths and what kind of networks can I leverage to make that happen? At that time, I got into University of Chicago Business School. And that's when I was also starting the company. So what I said was I'm going to use the networks to get into venture capital. It was still hard, and I was probably one of the only people that year, that got into venture in my business school. But I think I just leveraged all the networks I had. And I was in Chicago, so I made numerous trips on my own dime, crashed on many couches. I think it would require a different game right now, 10 plus years later. But I did what I needed to at that time to at least get meetings with people. And one by one, explore different paths, build relationship, do work for free many, many times. I took like 2 or 3 internships at the time, working for VC funds for free, things like that. You just played one step at a time. And starting my fund was also a moment of luck. I left my firms to go start a company. I was working for other firms. And the founders I'd worked with over 4 or 5 years, I'd been lucky to get some exits and stuff at the time already. They were not like gigantic exits, but they were exits to companies like Apple and Samsung and others. So those founders said, hey, if you're doing something, we would love to back you. Again, it's all shows people believed in me, I guess. So that's when I went and took 1 to 2 steps to next step and just kind of ended up starting a small firm. Again, leveraging my network. So it's all about luck married with me pushing through and making that a opportunity I wanted to pursue, I guess.
So I'm going to change gears slightly and talk about the other side, which is the companies you invest in, particularly from the point of view of under-resourced women entrepreneurs. For under-resourced women entrepreneurs, what would you say are the most critical things for them to be able to get successfully funded by venture capital?
Such a tough question. I can't be the one, right, to tell you that there's a magic bullet. I can only talk about my experience, which is what I did, which is you always have to stay 1 step ahead. I always read a lot about what someone did and I take that on as my challenge. Like, oh, someone raised such and such kind of capital. And I think about it. I'm like, can I accomplish that? I don't know. What's lacking in me? I'm not comparing, but in some ways, just trying to figure out where I stand. Because in some ways, it's written about many times, which is like you need to go to a certain kind of school, you need to do certain stuff, you need to look a certain way. Okay, I don't have those. So what do I need to do? So then I always talk about how I can differentiate myself in the crowd. And then once I do that, I talk about, okay, well, what else can I do to differentiate further? The other way to look at it is like, what are my strengths that others don't have? And so in my world, it was very straightforward. I was a nerd that understood enterprise and data pretty well. And I'm a woman, which is another thing. Very few people generally understand deep tech data. But on top of that, very few women are on the spectrum of just investing. Probably one of the few, maybe handful women at this stage now, the pre-seed stage, like first check stage. And that is my strength anyway. So I kind of narrowed that down and said that if that differentiates me, that differentiates me. And I love that. Again, I'm not going to do something just because it differentiates me. I want to also love it because I'm going to be doing for the next few decades. So now if you're starting a company, the things I would, as an underrepresented founder, something I would kind of first thing do is like, what is your strength? Have you worked in this industry before? If not, I would not do something, especially the first time around in that category. If you are going to go start something in whatever industry you're doing, if I have not worked in that space, I don't have confidence to solve problems in that space. That goes for anyone, not just underrepresented founders, right? The second thing I do is like, do I have differentiated perspective in that category? If I don't, like, again, what am I going to go out and say, like, I want to start a company next because why? Like, what's your differentiated view here? And third, build a solid team. Like going at it alone or going at it with a team that cannot build the product is really hard. That's the hardest thing to tell you as well, because at the end of the day, it's really hard to say find a technical co-founder or something, right? Like, but end of the day, like if you don't have money and if you're gonna want to build product, the cheapest way to build it is in-house versus hiring a firm. And at the end of the day, VCs don't want to back founders that don't know much about the space, and on top of that, have a firm that they're hiring to build the product. So I know it's disappointing to hear all this, but I think you have to position yourself from a place of strength to be able to raise capital. That's what good teams need, underrepresented or not, to raise capital. So I would strengthen your base here before you go out to raise capital.
I want to touch on the second point you made, which is you have a differentiated view of why. Can you give any examples, either from your portfolio companies, pitches you've seen, which are good examples of that, and things that may not be good examples of what a differentiated view is?
It's straightforward without giving examples, even. It's more like I worked in this industry for 5 years, 2 years, whatever it is, right? And we have this thesis called agitated workforce, which is I did this at my previous company. It was very frustrating when I wanted to solve this X and Y problem that I know really well. And when I went to pitch that as a product in our company, I couldn't get funding. I get upset. I got agitated because this needs to be solved and makes me less efficient. So smart people don't want to waste time. That's a fundamental thing that I back. And so when they wanted to go solve this, they go talk to their friends. Their friends say, if you build this, I'll buy it. Basically, that's what convinced them to go build this product outside of their company, because it was so hard for them to do it in their own company. and their friends or others outside gave them conviction to do so. That's what it takes. So if you haven't done the work beforehand to go validate this with, I would say, like at least 40, 50 plus customers, if you haven't had a unique perspective, which is we did this. So one of my recent companies I can't talk about yet, but they said we built this multiple times in our own companies, in companies we worked for before, right? Like, and now our own founder of those companies has convinced us to go leave our jobs and go start that as a new company. And by the way, that founder is backing us as well. When you pitch something like that, it's from a place of power versus place of defensive. Like, I think we should work on this. I don't know if it's going to work, and I have no experience. That's a bad story.
That's excellent. Thanks for explaining that further. I'm going to take a slight detour also on the question of pitching, especially for women founders. What is your experience from the other side as one of the people who are funding in terms of women and their grasp of the financial fundamentals of their business, especially with regard to under-resourced women entrepreneurs?
Honestly, the mistake we all make, and I catch myself doing this all the time, is ask for advice a lot. It's not that it's bad, it's the way you position it. The minute you ask someone for advice, you're giving them a pedestal that they belong on. And that's not a bad thing. But in venture, strong founders don't ask for advice. The difference is asking for advice in the dark versus asking for advice that is in context, right? So when I say there's a way to do it, you can say, I'm doing this. You, this VC person X or Y, have seen this industry. Here's our approach. Do you want to invest? And the VC then starts saying, like, well, I'm experienced. I don't see it working. And you can say, okay, why not? Or here's why we think it would work. It's a very straightforward path to take versus, oh, you're so amazing. You're so great. Can you give me advice? Okay, well, and what? And what space? And how are you positioning it? Why do you have different? It opens such a can of worms in the person's head. So that undermines that person already, which you don't want. So I think the perspective is don't go asking for advice. Come with a solution and say, do you have an opinion or do you want to react on this? And that's a better way to position it. There's so many others, but this is just one thing that irks me when founders do this, especially underrepresented founder, and I do it myself. To catch yourself, you have to do a lot of homework beforehand before you do that.
Are there others that particularly irk you in terms of under-resourced founders that you think would be helpful for us to hear?
This is the best one. I think if you just take care of the fundamentals here with what I'm saying, I think you'll come across more confident and strong. But oftentimes we don't because we lack that legwork.
So legwork is key, homework is key, knowing your subject matter is key, and knowing your thesis of why your business is better positioned is key, is kind of what I'm hearing. One other thing that I was very interested in is when a potential founder comes and presents their thesis or company, clearly there are some financials that they have to talk about. What is your experience seeing women founders present the financial fundamentals of their business relative to maybe male founders that you think would be instructive for us to hear?
Honestly, finance is the last thing I look at this stage. I know it's a funny thing. I'm a pre-seed investor. I believe in someone wanting to solve this for 10 years before I'm looking into finances. Because yes, finance and fundamentals are important, especially now. Like when when is your first customer coming in? When's your 10th customer coming in? And how are you getting to 100 million? All those basics are important. But that's not why I invest. I invest in why someone wants to solve for something in a very meaningful, differentiated way. And then I am the reason that maybe I can help them think about finances more.
In terms of enterprise tech or tech founders or the tech space in general, are there things that you would suggest or you're seeing in terms of trends of under-resourced women? What are the things that are making you feel good about this positive developments versus what are some of the areas where there might be concerns or potential opportunities for women to do a better job to succeed just in general as well as be successful in getting funded?
I know it's unfortunate the numbers in women founders being funded are so low, and I really wanted to do something there. Third of our founders are women, by the way. Those are much higher numbers than the industry, but we're restricted. I'm a B2B investor. So for me, if the women are not starting B2B companies, then the pool is small. And then I have to really work hard to then, from that small pool, find the best founders. So I would say that if you're going to start a company, just be very cautious of these three things. Like, one, start something you know well for the first business. If you make money the first time around, the second time around, no one's questioning you, like if you can solve something or not, right? The first time around, solve something that is meaningful. Two, that it can also generate revenue right away. A lot of the businesses founders pitch, end up being, I'll make money like year two or something. It's going to require a lot of ad spend and all that other stuff, which requires money. So end up starting businesses that don't need that much cash and you can start generating revenue early on. Because at the end of the day, VCs like traction. It may not be like getting you millions of dollars yet, but any dollar you get able to get is valuable. Start businesses that are not in a crowded space. So do your legwork. E-commerce, marketing, MarTech, sales tech, all that is kind of hard to raise money in right now, just because it's areas that are well funded at this time. Unless, as I said, there is something unique that comes my way from some real experienced founder in the category. And so if you don't have experience, don't start companies in that category.
Switching gears slightly, you come from a South Asian background, which I share with you, and there are some cultural aspects related to that. Can you talk about if and how your heritage has impacted your journey and what learnings you've gotten from them that you think might be helpful to others?
On the positive side, it shows I'm one of the few South Asian investors in deep tech, early stage enterprise kind of stuff. And yeah, and it's made me strong because it was a hard journey. Just to be honest, there's a lot of support for South Asian men in our industry, I think, or in our world. And then the numbers are so unfortunately skewed. So when you talk about underrepresented, South Asians don't count. And South Asian women get affected for that reason. Because I've so many times to my face heard from investors saying, oh, I care about people of color, but I don't care about South Asian folks, right? Because you're not that minority. And so that's unfortunate because we are. The amount of South Asians generally in this country are less than 3 or 4%. But, you've been able to get success on your own. You're not going to be qualified for these pools of capital that is allocated for that. And unfortunately, South Asian women, of all the CEOs out there, there's like maybe 2 or 3 that are South Asian women, and they don't even get talked about as much. In venture, when I started this journey, it was unfortunate. I was not in the age bucket. I was not in the demographic or everything else people might be looking for. And our own community is not helpful to us as well. We, as women, don't know who to reach out to. And all the men like being broy and helping each other out. The IIT network and everything. And how many IIT women do you know, right? It's unfortunate how much they have to work hard as well. So it's unfortunate many, many ways. But I just, again, as a mission, decided I'm going to make it on my own. And I did. So the brick wall perspective helps again. I think that's what I did. I wanted to be on my path and I found my own tribe. And it may or may not be South Asian. There are a lot of amazing men who have helped me along the way, especially South Asian men as well. But there are many who have not and who could have easily because they didn't see it in me, right? Like, to be honest, I was the same underrepresented founder who made all the same mistakes that others are making. I asked for advice. Who would look at me and say, you don't have venture experience for a long time. I'm not going to back you. The advice I'm giving is, again, from the place that I've experienced all this on my own. And I think that for me, that is one of those things where I'm doing this job because my life is my message, as Gandhi says, and my last name's Gandhi. So I'm doing this because I want to leave a message for people looking at me and says, she did it, I can't do it, right? Like right now I'm intimidated by like people who've been successful. They went to Stanford, they went to these amazing places that gave them the edge. And I had to buy my way into that by working hard, supporting myself on my own, having no network, no guidance. My parents didn't go these routes. We don't come from wealth. So it's very much of it's a challenge. But I also know my limitations. If I'm going to do something, I also know that I need to lay the fundamentals for it. I didn't just start a company out of the bat because I needed some savings to feel safe. So I worked 10 years in the corporate world before I went to start a company. But when I did do all this, I just felt safe. Even if I fail, I have a fallback of my savings, right? And I knew I would do it for 2, 3 years and had an exit strategy, which is when I reach so and so milestone. And if I'm not at so and so stage, I'm going to quit. I'm going to swallow my ego. So you have to go in with all that mindset wise. That's what I did. And some people go for years and years and years. And I think the brick wall perspective is not that great for that. Like, don't be so stubborn that you think you're going to succeed 6 years in, because then to gain some other experience that people are telling you you need before you go about doing this.
So, have there been points where you've really been challenged to say this is a really dark moment? And if so, either technically or externally or internally, what has helped you get through them other than being the brick wall breaker?
Look, there have been very many dark moments. You question yourself, you walk out of a meeting. When you're a brick wall person, you think you do whatever it takes. It works negatively too. You go to a meeting sometimes for a drink, you go to on a weekend meeting or whatever. And as a single woman, you never know. Walking out, was it a meeting? Is it a successful meeting in the end? Or was that someone hitting on you? It was just so many inappropriate things. And you walk out and saying, is it me? Am I worth this? Am I heading in the right direction? So I started wearing a fake ring just because I just knew it was in that direction. But that didn't stop many people anyway. So many dark moments around that. But then there's like something there that happens that gives you a glimmer of hope, or you try to ignore that. You find another hobby. Like, there are two things that clear my mind, which is swimming and cooking. All cliche things sometimes as well. Like, you're a woman, you cook, right? Like, that also works negatively. And I don't watch sports really. Like, so there's nothing like that makes me cool enough to like be part of networks. Sometimes makes me feel bad about myself. And I'm like, oh, I wish I magically was like into horse riding or some stupid thing like that, right? Like, nothing against those people, but it's like I don't have those networks. All my life I was just working hard to make it next day. I didn't have time to pick up golf. I didn't have time to like learn the best wines, right? Like, so I just focus again, go back to like clearing my head, figuring out, is this something I still want to pursue? Is this going to keep making me feel bad? Or do I need to like do something else before I come back to it? Those are the decisions you always have to make on your own. Again, brick wall doesn't mean you walk all over yourself.
And what have been some of the high moments, either personally or professionally?
I know I'm one of those people that don't celebrate high moments enough, even though I know I need to. But I guess one of those things, I didn't know how to get into college 20 plus years ago. They didn't even know who would accept me without SAT scores and such. But then I applied to business school without, again, knowing anything. People prep for like GMATs and stuff for long. I didn't do much. But then I applied to business school, got on a wait list, obviously, because I like applied like December of that year, and January, like December 15th, and the January 6th was when you hear results, and people, again, prep for years. So I got on a wait list and then found my way into college again and got off it. And then 10 years later, I got awarded the Distinguished Young Alumni Award for that school in Chicago booth last year.
Congratulations.
2021, yeah. It's, again, maybe not a big deal for many people, but it was a personal milestone. They give that award to one person a year. And the people the year before me and after me are like even more amazing. I think personal milestone, things like that matter. Maybe in venture, that doesn't mean anything. If it's a thing from Stanford, maybe people care about, but because that's where a lot of VCs and startups come out of. Not that Chicago is not the good school. It's like one of the best schools for many other things. So yeah, it matters for me. That was like one of those things, like, I didn't tear up because at this point I'm so numb to some of those things, like, oh, finally the world's recognizing all this. But it is a moment to celebrate. So things like that matter. Things like right now I'm able to like fund many founders from the fund, but also personally, I'm an LP in a few funds. Like, all those things matter. When one day I didn't have a penny in my bank, So yeah.
And what's your vision for the future? What's the thing that takes your breath away that you want to accomplish someday?
I'm still young. I'm still learning. My mission changes every day. But for now, let's see how far I can go with this. Hopefully have a few IPOs under my belt and really make it a name. The mission here is I didn't have the pattern that people would want. So what are some other things you need to look for in a human, which I'm also, by the way, evaluating? Like, how do I recognize myself to fund someone like me, that they'll be successful 10 years later? So looking for that and hopefully getting some IPOs to really close that loop. I'm successful, but not that successful yet.
I think you're very successful. So have you found the code to finding the next Shruti? I'm curious.
Well, that would mean that they have to IPO. Before that is it's great success and they're raising great capital, and we have many founders like that. But unless they IPO, it's a very black and white business. Unless you make money and the money is very transparent, you made money or you didn't make money. It's not like I made money in a secret world. So similarly, my track record is also public. So unless any of these founders go public, they haven't broken out yet. We have unicorns, but they haven't gone public, you know?
That's great. Well, we're rooting for the day when you will go public. So
Thank you.
You got one fan. I'm sure you got
Thank
many
you.
more. What would you tell the younger Shruti who are starting over? What would you tell her in terms of anything she should do differently?
It's so hard because I am because of that Shruti. I hate those regrets actually. But I always wonder, like, what if I moved to the Bay Area sooner? But maybe I don't know. Again, there's always the other side. Maybe I would have been like the small fish in a big pond at that time. Why I'm here is I was a big fish in a small pond, that it's easier to stand out, gives you confidence. So I, again, don't know. I think I've done a good job of following my conviction. Maybe I should have listened to myself more.
And advice to other starting women entrepreneurs?
I don't give advice. It's, again, I told you, advice comes from a place of your experience. And sometimes when you ask people for advice, they have different experience and different life story. It's not helpful to get advice from someone who didn't go through your journey. It's good to get feedback and 2 cents from people, but you have to make your own decisions from your journey. So I don't give people advice, because listen to my message, listen to what I've done, take something away from it, but don't listen to people is my real advice.
That's great advice. Thank you for that. I have to think about whether I should listen to it or not. Just kidding.
It's true.
Thank you very much, Shruti. This was a fantastic conversation. I've learned a ton, and I'm sure others will as well. Thank you, and I'm sure you'll be super successful, and we'll all be rooting for it. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Find show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achiiv.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or Google Podcast and never miss another episode. Want to help others like you? Leave us a review and tell a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go achieve.